Every Angular component has a life cycle, and Angular throws events at various points of this life cycle. This would include component creation, component destruction, after the data has been set, after the view has been run through and rendered. And you can hook into these events to do processing of data if you like. And in this video, we're going to do a simple demonstration of how to hook into those events, kind of when they fire, how often they fire, so we can kind of demystify what's going on with the Angular lifecycle hooks. So let's talk real quick about creating components. There's a very simple way of creating the components in all the files that you need, and it's using the command ng generate component. And let's go ahead and give it a path directory. This path directory is going to go right under the app directory, source app, and we're going to call it views. And we're going to give it a folder. We'll call it shows. And then we're going to create a component called show. We're going to click enter. That's going to take a second. It'll generate all of these files. We have an HTML template, the test spec sheet, the TypeScript backing, and the SCSS file. And we're going to create one more, and we're going to do the simple shorthand. So we're going to do ng instead of generate and c instead of component. And we're going to do views, shows, and then we're going to do show child. And that's going to create the same way that we did here. And as you see here, views, show, and then we have two folders here with the components. All right, so let's talk about lifecycle hooks, kind of try to demystify what they're doing, kind of when they run, and kind of how you can use them, and in some cases when you should be careful to not use them. So if you want to hook into the lifecycle, you need to add the implements and then the name of the lifecycle hook. And by default, we get this on a init lifecycle hook whenever you generate a component. What we can also add is this on destroy, which is called whenever the component goes out of view and they're going to remove the Angular removes the component. So you can see the on init is right here called ng on init, on destroy is ng on destroy. And all of these follow that same ng and then the name component in order to hook into these things. The after content init is the other initialization, and there's four initialization: on init, on destroy, content, and after view. So the content is when all the data, like your methods and your properties, have been set, and then it's going to run the after content init. The after view init is when the page is rendered on the screen. You're going to get an initialization there. So that's when that method is going to run. And then we have your change detection. So these are going to run more often. So for example, whenever you're messing with the particular view you're in, you're going to run a do check, and it's going to look for any changes within the component, and then it's going to fire at that point. On change is somewhat similar, but it's only going to be called whenever there's an input change from an external external component. So for example, when we pass in data to this test method, it'll be called, as opposed to when we're messing with any components within the child, the do check is going to be called. So there's a slight difference, and we'll kind of point out those differences in our little component over here. So the after content check is going to be called after the after content init, and it's also going to be called every time there's a do check. So the after review check is going to be called after the after content check. And we'll kind of show you how these things are working very, very shortly. All right, let's go a little deeper into what we were doing with these layout hooks. All right, so just to kind of give you an idea of what's going on, this is all, right here is the parent component. It's the show component here. And this has a child component, app show child, that's located here. Right now I have the show child hidden, so nothing's being run. And all of my event hooks are hooked into the child. So right now nothing's happening. I can make some of these changes. You don't see anything firing because I've hooked into the child, and it's firing the data to the parent, and the parent is collecting that and counting that data. So that's what's going on with this beautiful, wonderful control that I created here. So let's go ahead and open up the child. So we're going to do show. And as you see, the child input has fired a couple events. And the event here, the initialization event, is the always fired event whenever you start up the component. The component content init is when all the data is set, and that's always set on initialization. And the after view init is set once this view child input in this wonderful text box here is initialized. So that's why those ran. And because I had a value, its test parent here is bound to this input element, which is this input element here, it's being passed into this test property here on show child. As you see, this input test here, and then that is being bound right here. So because that happened, I ran an ng on, I hit into the ng on changes event. So that got called, and I passed it up to the parent and counted it. In addition, the do check, which is always run just to see if there's any changes on the layout, that was run once. And then the after content check was run after the ng do check, as it always does. And then the after view check is run after the after content checked. That's just kind of how the process of how this works. So we'll kind of show you the differences. The biggest difference here is from the ng on change to the do check. So I click here on the parent, nothing happens. I click A, and it runs the ng on changes, which forces the do check to run, which forces all of these to run. But then, because there was a change on the child, the do check had to run again. So it ran, the content check ran, and the view check ran. So you can see this if I run, so I clicked here and you saw there was another one. So you can see that when you're clicking on the and changing here, it basically came into scope for the input element. So a do check was run. And then we clicked one letter here, and then it increments again, and all these increment too. So I can do that again, again, and again, and again, and again. All right, so now we're up to 10. So let's go back up to the A, and it saw I lost focus. So what did it do? It counted again. So I'm going to count, I'm going to hit the parent input. Well, that ran here, and then this forced a change because the ng on change ran, so it ran the do check and then content and view. But it also changed the child element, so the do check ran again, and then the content, and then the view ran. So once again, we clicked on this, it ran 1, 2. We clicked off, we lost focus on the child element, so it ran again, and then we clicked 1, 2. And see, this incremented twice because the ng on change ran, we all ran this again. There was a layout change on the child, or there was text change on the child, so these do content check ran. So this counter here, oh, let's do one more thing. Let's dispose of it. So we close this, and we saw that the destroy method is run. So we can click on this, nothing's happening. So I hope kind of showing you how this works, you can kind of get a better idea of how these hooks are used for the life cycle. So you got your initialization, your destroy, your change detection, which only runs when there's a pass in of the input elements from the parent to the child, and then the do check that's always running in the background to see if there's any layout changes that it needs to look for and process. And then these after check and view check are always run. So this is important. You don't want to hook into these and do a lot of complex computations or something that's a long-running process, because it's going to make your child element here in this case very laggy. So it's not going to do very good performance. So you want to be very careful about where you hook in and how you hook into these and what you do once you've hooked into these. So I hope after going over this, we kind of get a better idea about what these layout changes are doing, how they're counted, how often they're run. So you kind of have a good idea that if you need to hook into them, that you hook into them smartly and you do a good job, and you don't cause the UI to be very laggy. All right, so we're going to go ahead and stop.